Life to Heart, a program which is to help you understand and to become your loving self. I'm Dr. Mitra Rashidian. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist and a certified sexologist in full-time private practice located in Encino, California. And this is KMET 149.0 AM, ABC News Radio Live. And glad to be here with all of you, including my business partner, colleague, mentor, best friend, Dr. Robert Jaffe.
Thank you. Nice to be here with you.
Nice to be here, as always.
Welcome to all of our listeners and watchers. We're live also. And we're going to talk today about some things of interest to most people, which is relationships and codependency.
Relationship, which includes sex.
Which includes sex.
So let's just spice it up a little bit, right?
Well,
so that
yeah.
we get the more attention of people.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. Well, codependency,
Right.
of course, is relationships with them. Doesn't have to include sex.
It doesn't have to include sex,
Right.
yes. But then again, sex is a part of our lives, whether we wanted it or not. We are born sexual.
We are.
Right?
We are.
And then let's see, what do we have today in the context of codependency and relationship. And before that, I like to point out that this COVID is really, not leaving us alone.
Oh, okay.
Seems like, for now is a part of our lives. Hopefully we don't invite the COVID inside our lives by not wearing masks, and by not, doing our vaccinations and by not getting close to people who already have been exposed to COVID and they could pass that to us.
Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't matter what kind of COVID, a person gets. Neither one of them are good. Neither one of them is less severe than the other one. The point is that, to do just about everything we can to stay healthy, because once one member of the family, is exposed to COVID of any kind of it, rest assured that the others may get it fast.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Right.
So,
Exactly. So since we have to do everything we can, we have to, get our food delivered, and we have to wash everything thoroughly, and then we have to take it in the bathroom and close the door and lock the bathroom door and eat it and stay in the bathroom, put a little rug down in the bathroom floor.
What are you
And
talking
not- and
about?
Well, so we're doing everything we can. We're going to isolate.
Oh, come on. You don't have to isolate yourself in the bathroom.
Well, that's the safest place, isn't it? Nobody's going to bother you when you're in the bathroom.
Maybe for you. I don't know. But let's not get personal at that level.
So, yeah, we got it. We have to take precautions, but it's not. We don't have to go crazy over it.
Right.
That's what I was trying to say.
Yes.
Yeah. We have to be cautious, but not paranoid.
Yes. I mean, this morning, as I was, walking in the parking area, coming to my office, there was this lady who was not wearing a mask, and everybody who was walking in that area, we were all wearing a mask. And she suddenly started to sneeze, not even once, not twice. She kept sneezing and she kept coughing, and she had no mask and she wasn't covering her mouth or her face.
Was that the lady who had written on the front of her blouse and the back, "I have COVID and I'm proud of it"?
No, I didn't pay attention to her outfit. I was just trying to get away from her as fast as I could. I was holding my breath while I was covering my mask. I was wearing a mask and I was covering my face with the scarf that I had, and I was just didn't want to stay in that area to breathe, so I was holding my breath probably for as long as I could. I turned purple, but I didn't feel safe to do
So
that.
you passed out.
I didn't pass out. No, I'm here, right?
You passed out, but you didn't get COVID. But when you passed out, you hit your head on. Now you have a concussion.
Okay, so today we have Dr. Jaffe in a mood of making jokes,
I've
which
got
is
a sil-
good
I'm in a
because,
silly mood today.
yes, because we don't see that often happening.
That's right.
You can only imagine what's my day like when I'm working with him, right? Okay, so there you go. You got a fresh taste of that.
We got a
Okay.
fresh taste, indeed, indeed.
So, Dr. Jaffe, you're the expert in codependency.
Right. So codependency. It's interesting. There was a talk show psychiatrist. Those of you who are above 30 may remember him. Above 30, yeah, maybe above 30 or 40. No, probably above 40. You might remember him. Name is Dr. David Viscott.
Mhm.
Dr. Viscott was a very bright gentleman, psychiatrist, and he had a talk show, the Viscott Hour, and he would talk to people on the air and do really brief therapy with them. He would, like, get to the heart of the matter, tell them what the problem was, and tell them how to fix it, which is not actually therapy, it's more advice giving, but that's all he could do in the 2 or 3 minutes that he was allotted on air. And people used to call up and say to Dr. Viscott, I am in a codependent relationship. And Dr. Viscott used to say, what do you mean co? Why do you say co? And basically, Dr. Viscott was saying you could just say you're in a dependent relationship. And really, a codependent relationship just means that each person is overly dependent on the other.
You know, that's a very valid point because, knowing what I know about codependency, I've always asked myself, why are we calling it codependency? What's
Mm-hmm.
the function of co here?
Mm-hmm.
Because it is dependency.
Right.
My happiness depends on the person that I want to be in my life. My happiness depends on my achievement. My happiness depends on my relationship. My happiness depends on so and so and things, right?
Mm-hmm.
So how is this a co?
Right.
There is no co, but we call it codependency.
Yeah, and the reason for that is because um, what we originally, when the 12-step movement started to become popular, 12 steps, meaning Alcoholics Anonymous, all the anonymous groups, there's many anonymous groups. There's Alcoholics Anonymous, there's actually there is a Codependence Anonymous.
Yes, there
There's a
is.
Families Anonymous, families of people who have addiction problems.
Right.
Um, there's Cocaine Anonymous. There's Marijuana Anonymous. There's Sexual Compulsivity Anonymous. There's all sorts of anonymous, and it's all based on
There's Egos Anonymous.
and well, Egos Anonymous. That one is belongs to us, which we're going to eventually try to do something with. Um, but all the anonymous groups were based on the Alcoholics Anonymous, which started off with a couple of gentlemen who were alcoholics, and they tried everything to stop drinking. They tried psychiatry, they tried religion, they tried everything, and finally they through religion they realized that there were certain principles, not based on religion, but based on ethics and spirituality. And so they came up with these principles, and they said, if we can live by these principles, we think we can stay alcohol free. And so there became 12 steps and 12 principles. They call them the 12 steps and the 12 traditions.
Right.
And they discovered in the working of those principles and traditions that the people who were connected to them, the wives or husbands of the alcoholics, were also struggling with their own dependency on the person who was alcohol dependent. And so since the person was alcohol dependent, he or she already had a dependency, and the person who was attached to them, their wife, girlfriend, or boyfriend, didn't have an alcohol dependency. They said, well, we're going to call them a codependent because they were struggling with the same kinds of issues that the alcoholic was struggling with without the alcohol being involved. So that's actually where codependent came from.
I see.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you for that explanation. So that means those are people who are in relationship with people with some level of, addictions.
Well, some level of addiction, and
Addictions,
they
right.
call them codependents. Yeah.
Or compulsivity.
Or yeah, well, compulsivity is usually more with a substance or process.
Right.
Like for example, if you're sexually compulsive, that means you're overusing your sexuality in order to deal with emotional difficulties.
Exactly.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah. So, but we don't actually call codependents compulsives.
No.
Yeah.
No. No, codependents are just overly dependent.
They're overly dependent on the welfare. They want if you ask them, they will say, I really need this other person to be free of their addiction, and everything I do is to help them become free of their addiction. But some of the things that codependents do actually make it worse, not better, for the person who's dependent.
Right.
So. I was working with a gentleman this morning who struggles with codependency. He struggles with it, and he's actually not an addict himself. And the person who he is in a codependent relationship is not an addict, but uh, he struggles with it with his wife, and he struggles with it with his father. And that means that he feels as though it's his job to please them. And so if they want him to do something, he doesn't want to do it, he will agree to do it. And then he will either do it and feel resentment for doing it, or he will conveniently forget to do it, which is what we talk about a lot, which is the subconscious runs the show.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
So sometimes when we forget to do things, there's a subconscious reason why we're forgetting. I'm not saying in every case, but in many cases there's a subconscious reason why we forgot. And so if his wife asks him, let's say, to come home early, because she's making a special dinner, and let's say he's obedient to her, and he feels resentment toward being obedient, he may forget to come home early, and then she gives him hell for coming home late, and he's like, well, what could I do? I forgot, and it's like, it's not my fault. But actually, he has some resentment toward her, which we're just beginning to uncover right now in our therapy.
Which is actually, so we can see that perhaps based on what I'm hearing, based on your explanation here, which is, so deep and insightful, is that a person who, what is known as codependent in a person, they are carrying with them this deep-rooted anger and hurt.
Correct.
And maybe even a deeper level of rage.
Yes.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
So these are, essentially what at the subconscious level runs the show.
Correct.
Which makes them forgetful about, for example, in this particular case that you're talking about.
Exactly. So we're just notified we're going to have to take a quick break.
Right.
Please stay with us, and we would love to hear from you. Feel free to call us or text us or email us during the show, and we'd love to talk with you or respond to your comments or questions. Please stay with us, and we'll talk to you in a moment.
Absolutely. Welcome from our commercial break. This is our two-hour program at KMET 90 AM BBC News Radio Live. Dr. Mitra and Dr. Robert here. For those of you who just joining us, we're talking about codependency and different aspects of it, and how do we come up with the word vocabulary or term of codependency. We just explained that, and we would like for you to contact us and share your opinion, share your thoughts, share, how do you connect to this conversation, to this information, and who do you have in mind when we talk about codependency? Do you know of anybody that you believe may be in a codependent relationship? So knowing your ideas actually help us to expand this program and to know what to offer to you the next time. And therefore we are inviting you for you to call us, please, and share your story with us. Your stories are unique and important, and we look forward to know about them. Our phone number here is 951-922-3532.
Yes. So here we are talking about codependence.
Yes.
And I'm going to segue a little bit right now and talk about how we develop our thought processes, which leads us to becoming codependent or not codependent. We are all born dependent, right?
Absolutely.
We are totally dependent when we're born. We can't speak. We can't ask for things. We can't. I'm not going to say we can't communicate, because we do communicate as soon as we're born. We have body language, and we have facial expression,
and we have all of our senses activated.
All of our senses, and we also have the vocal cords,
right,
which allows us to make sounds.
Right.
The sounds can be very, very cooing and gurgling and crying, different kinds of cries. So we do communicate, but
right. Basically, our senses are our communication network.
Our senses, yes, we communicate with the world through our senses.
Through our senses, yes.
And so the people that we come into the world with are the people who are charged with our care, and we are dependent upon them for our survival. We need them in order to survive. And even though we don't have our left brain, which is the thinking part of our brain, developed, we do have the right part of our brain developed, which is the feeling part of our brain. We can feel all kinds of sensations. We're very sensitive, as you said, to our senses. We can see, we can hear, we can smell, we can taste. All of that is available to us. And so through our dependent needs, we communicate with our caretakers, and we learn that our caretakers, when we signal them, will respond to whatever it is we need. Or we learn that through our caretakers, that when we signal them, sometimes they respond and sometimes they don't.
Right.
Or we find out that when we signal our caretakers, most of the time they don't respond, and occasionally they do. So
we get a response eventually, but it's the nature of how we get the response.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. Well, but when I say some of the time, we don't get response. A lot of the time, there are caretakers, for example, who will ignore the child's crying for not just a few seconds or minutes, but for an hour, right, or more.
Right.
They are believing that the child's cry does not need to be attended to, and of course that has very, very powerful consequences on the child when you learn that when you reach out, nobody is there.
Exactly. And then when the child, after a period of crying time, they stay quiet. They don't stay quiet because they learned the lesson.
Mm-hmm.
They stay quiet because they're so damn tired and depressed.
Correct. Correct. Yeah. Yeah. The child isn't going to learn
Yeah.
by them not getting responded to stop crying.
Yeah.
But they may stop crying, but they're not going to learn that I'm not allowed to cry.
Right.
What they're going to learn is my crying doesn't get me anywhere, which then creates a frustration and a depression, as you said.
Yes.
Yeah. So, but let's assume that the parents are fairly attentive and they are responding to the child. So the child learns that their dependency needs can get met as they communicate. And as they get a little bit older, as they get a month old, 2 months, 3 months old, they start to communicate more effectively.
Right.
Because their left brain starts to come online and they start to be able to think and reason. Now, certainly at 3 months, they're not going to be reasoning like somebody at 5 years or 10 years or 20 years, but they do have a rudimentary sense of reason, and so they can be comforted in a different way than a newborn can be comforted. So, but we know that when we're 3 months old, 5 months old, a year old, 2 years old, 3 years old, we know that we still are dependent. We know that we cannot cook for ourselves, for example. We know that we can't keep ourselves dry unless our parents change us. We know that we are still beholding. We're still dependent on our parents. And if our parents make it okay for us to need them, then we develop a solid dependency, a solid feeling that dependency is okay. It's not wrong. It's not bad. There's nothing wrong with being dependent, because the people that you are dependent upon will meet your needs the majority of the time. And so that's the beginning of dependency. Now, if our parents are wise and they allow us to begin to reach out into the world and start doing things for themselves, then our parents back off when we want to be when we want to try to do something on our own. Even though our parents can do it more quickly and better than we can, our parents give us permission to reach out into the world and to learn how to walk and fall and pick themselves up and walk and fall.
And this is so crucial in terms of, a child learning about their abilities, to learn how to do problem solving, to learn, how to trust themselves that they can, make it happen for themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the trust part to me is more important. I mean, for me, that goes first. The first thing that I look in child development. And there are parents that they believe as an act of love, and I'm sure that is accurate, as an act of love, they want to do everything for their children. They want to bring them everything. They want to provide everything for their children. Well, that is all great and wonderful. But when we look at the vocabulary all, we want to be very careful, because when we do it all for our children, right, we're taking away their life skills from them. And we can, as parents, become, a guiding person in their lives, like how to tie up your shoes. So I'm going to do it once for you or twice. Now let's do it together. Now you do it yourself, right? Or picking up after children. I see moms and dads, more so moms, that they pick up after their teenagers, teen children, right? I see wives that they pick up after, their husbands and their sons and their daughters, right? So those are not acts of love. Maybe from the perspective of a person who does it, but the reality is we are disabling, the people that we are doing things for them. We don't allow for them, number one, to learn that, what is life, what life skills includes. Number two, we give them the sense of entitlement that, they are entitled to just and not be responsible for themselves. And and then the most dangerous part is that when they go to the world and they have to be on their own, they don't know how to manage themselves.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Right.
Yeah. So we are dependent, and then we move into independency, where we're learning how to do these life skills, how to take better care of ourselves. And if our parents are wise, they back off and allow us to do that. And then we stay in the independent stage for quite a while. We stay in the independent stage up through teenagehood, and often through our 20s. We stay in that independent stage where we want to do things for ourselves. We take pride in doing things for ourselves, and we take pride in not needing anybody else to do things for us. Now, as we mature, because we have felt that it was safe to be dependent, and we become interested in our sexuality and in finding a partner. It doesn't matter whether it's gay or straight. We go through that same stage where we start looking for a partner, most of us. And when that happens and we want to find a partner, what we find is a partner who can do things for us that we can't do for ourselves.
Or we believe we can do for ourselves.
Well, our partners bring in things that they are skilled at that we don't have.
Right.
And we bring in things that we're skilled at that they don't have. That doesn't mean we can't learn.
Right.
But we don't know everything, right? So we bring in a partner and we see qualities about that partner that attract us. It's not all of what the attraction is, but it's part of what the attraction is we admire qualities about them, and we want to learn from them, and we also like being around them because they live those qualities. And so that's part of what attracts us. It's not the whole thing, but it's part of what attracts us. And since we have been allowed to be dependent without any negative consequences, we can allow ourselves to have a certain amount of dependency on our partner. Our partner can do the same thing with us. So most of the time in our life, we are independent. And some of the time we are dependent on our partner and they are dependent on us. And then we matriculate over time to the third level of growth, which is interdependency. We're not totally independent. We're not totally dependent, but we're independent most of the time. We can handle most things. Sometimes we need our partner. If we get ill, we can depend on our partner. If we get hurt emotionally, we can depend on our partner. We can give them comfort. Even though we can comfort ourselves, it's not the same. It's as being comforted by someone else.
Right. I mean, just the fact that, knowing that there is somebody there, even if that person is not able to do much, but just their presence, in our life, it's comforting.
Yeah.
It's safe.
Yeah. And when you say do much, I think that I would say
I'm talking about like cooking or doing grocery or
something physical.
Or something physical.
Right,
yes,
right. But the person, another person gives us what we cannot give ourselves, which is another person's energy.
Energy, yeah.
Right.
Just their being, that their presence.
The being gives us an energy that we can't give to ourselves because we're not two people, we're one.
Exactly.
Right. Yeah.
Like for example, I heard a friend of ours, had to admit, his wife to the hospital, right?
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, the wife is at the hospital because that's the level of care that she needs.
Right.
Right. And he is unable to provide the job of, to provide what a hospital does for his wife or what a doctor can do for his wife.
Right.
But his presence to be there and advocate for what she needs is what he can do.
And also his presence reassures her that she's not going through this alone.
Alone, exactly.
Yeah.
That's what I mean by that.
Yes.
Which to me is far more this is priceless. This
Mm-hmm.
is something that, I wish that for all partners to end up having together.
Yeah,
You know.
exactly, exactly. So, but what happens if you don't if you don't matriculate the dependency stage effectively? Um, if your needs aren't met when you're dependent, and or when you start to become independent, your parent or guardian starts to do things for you because they can do them better, and then you begin to learn uh, that you need to depend on someone because when you try to do it on your own, it isn't as good as when the other person does it. So you may begin to stop. You may stop trying to do it because which is what the case was in my growing up, where my mother loved to do things for me, and I didn't learn how to cook, and I didn't learn how to keep my room clean because she wanted to do it for me. And so that was something she was doing to meet her own needs, and at the same time she felt like she was helping me, and I certainly enjoyed it. I liked her doing those things for me, but it caused me to not feel good about my own abilities. And we can talk about how that affects codependency as we come back. We just got notified again that we're going to take a little break, and we will be back. Please stay with us.
951.
Yeah, yeah.
Sure. Welcome back from the commercial break. Dr. Mitra and Dr. Robert here, uh, talking about codependency and heart to heart. Our phone number is 951-922-3532. Please call us because, we want to know about you. We want to know, what do you think about codependency? If you have ever experienced that, if you know of somebody who you think is having a life as dependent, and what's that like for them? What's that like for you to have somebody like that in your life? So call us 951-922-3532. So Dr. Jaffe, you were talking about.
So I was saying in my family, my mother had some emotional problems. She would go into rages at times, and and the rage would be directed towards myself and my sister. Uh, and sometimes my parents would have big verbal fights. There was nothing physical, but it was verbal fights. And but my mother, again, she was a very obsessive house cleaner, and so she did for me what I could have done for myself when I was in my teens, and didn't learn how to. And my father would go off to work, and he was very industrious, and he had a lot of concern about making enough money, and he was a very bright guy, so he spent a lot of time at work making a lot of money. And I was left at home with my mother and my younger sister, and my father would give me the message that it was my job to take care of my mother because she was not stable. And so, because my mother did all of these things for me, like making sure that the laundry was done and my shirts and underwear were put away, and that I had plenty to eat, and she was also involved in any tests that I took, helping me study. She was very good that way. But because my dad wasn't there, and he gave me the task of taking care of my mother, and my mother took care of everything on my physical end. I had in my mind that was my unwritten contract, that women would take care of me physically, and I would take care of them emotionally. And of course, when I became in my teens and 20s, and I became sexual, the physical extended to sexuality. So I felt like women were gonna take care of me by having sex with me, and also by doing all of the household stuff. and I would help them in any emotional difficulties that they needed. And so that was my unwritten contract that I really hadn't. Talking about it now after having a lot of therapy and being able to understand and verbalize it. But but going back to codependence, that was like a contract, an unwritten contract, where I felt like I was dependent on the woman to do those things for me.
So that was your emotional
And it was it was my emotional contract, and also sex and emotion, sex, and also the woman taking care of the house, raising the kids. All of that was in my mind, and so I felt like this is what she needs to do for me. So if she's not doing that for me, she's not holding up her end of the contract. And it became kind of a quid pro quo where I do for her, she does for me, and that led me into codependent relationships where there was a lot of mistrust and a lot of entitlement that I had, and so the woman that I was attracted to also had emotional difficulties because that was part of what I was raised with. I was unconsciously looking for that, and so we had this dysfunctional relationship where she was dependent on me emotionally, I was dependent on her physically, and that was an example of codependency. That's one example. I was talking with a client this morning, a gentleman who actually who actually caught COVID, and he didn't take the vaccine. And I asked him, and I said, "Why didn't you take the vaccine?" And he thought about it for a moment, and he said, "I don't know." And I said, "Really? But you decided you didn't want to?" He says, "Yes." And as we continued working together, it turned out that his father and mother both were very controlling. And so he felt like with the vaccine, that since the government is pushing it, that he wasn't going to be told what to do. And so he then had he was rebelling against it. And so he wasn't really able to check in with his authentic true self to see, well, what is in my best interest? Because he was caught in the rebellion part of his mind, where he was rebelling against something that actually was good for him. And as he began to think about it, he said, "Oh, I really screwed up because I should have taken the vaccine, and I didn't."
Mm-hmm.
So, and we call those type of things introjection.
Right.
Introjection is when we get an idea from one of our parents that we accept without critically examining it. And then once we accept it, we act as though it's true.
And it actually becomes, part of our own reality.
It becomes part of our own personality and our own reality, because this is the way that my dad saw it, and this is the way that I'm seeing it, because I have my dad on a pedestal, or I have my mom on a pedestal, and therefore I have to be like them. Or if I don't have them on a pedestal and I'm upset with them, I have to be the opposite of them. So this is the beginning of codependency, and codependency is I'm not going to say it's ubiquitous throughout the world, but it is much more common than uncommon in relationships.
Do you think it's safe to say that codependency is a form of process addiction?
Yes, it's a process addiction because the process is that you learn to respond and react and behave in a way that is triggering an old introjected parental statement or attitude.
Right.
So when you get triggered, like the government says, well, take the vaccination. It's really important, and you have to take it, and you have to be aware of other people, and this isn't just for yourself. Well, all of those are all true, and they're all meaningful. But if you're used to people telling you things, and you just have accepted it, and you realize that you don't like somebody telling you what to do, you may automatically rebel against it. and you rebel against it, and it doesn't really matter whether the thing is good for you or not, as in the case that I just talked about. Or you may be compliant, and that's what this gentleman is he's very compliant. So when somebody in his life who's important to him asks him for something, it's hard for him to say no.
Right.
And if he does say no, then he feels guilty.
So the difference between your example of yourself and this gentleman is that he is compliant, and you felt entitled.
Correct.
Right?
Correct.
So how the feeling of entitlement falls into codependency?
Well, so if you're entitled, then there's a condition on the relationship. And just as if you're rebellious, just as if you're compliant, there's a condition on the relationship. And the condition is self-imposed. I'm the prince, so I have things coming to me. So I have an expectation of what's coming to me. And then if I don't get it, then I'm upset. Not realizing that the expectation that I have is based on how I was raised and based on what I got and didn't get in my family of origin. So I bring it into my current relationship, and now I'm exchanging favors. So we have an exchange favor relationship rather than a moving together in the same direction relationship.
Yes, thank you for that. The reason I asked you that question because, my background in research is about culture, right? And we see that in a group of people that have preference towards having a son versus a daughter, right? We see this sense of entitlement.
Yes.
Significantly among the group of people with some preference concept.
Correct.
And belief, right?
Correct.
So we see that in relationship, that we see it, among our couples here. When the background comes from that perspective, the sense of entitlement sometimes is not just subconscious, but it is actually very much conscious. So it becomes part of the left brain, right brain process. I mean, it's so deep rooted that it's
never called into question.
It's never called into question.
It's an assumption, just like you never call into question the fact that you're female.
Right.
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 It's an assumption.
It's an assumption.
It's a basic assumption that that everything that is generated from that basic belief assumption that you're female. That's never called into question, right?
Right.
And of course, some people who are born into the wrong body, they don't have that assumption.
Right.
And then they feel odd because everybody else has that assumption.
Right.
But they don't have that assumption.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it's such a strong belief that if anything happens beside the nurturing of the entitlement expectation, life becomes like a disaster. It's just not acceptable. They just don't know, or it's hard for them to even imagine having a different experience or a different concept in life.
Right.
What do you mean that you haven't washed my socks? What do you mean there is no dinner ready? What do you mean you didn't have time? What do you mean you don't want to have sex with me? What do you mean you don't want to have sex this way with me?
Well, that's
and the list goes on.
Right.
And on.
Right. And then on the female side, the female is raised with the belief that she's a second-class citizen and that she doesn't have the right.
Exactly.
So then she does everything that she can to please and placate the man.
Right.
And then can't understand why she's not happy.
Right.
Right.
Right. Because and then the point about codependency is that there's never a deep level of satisfaction, no matter how one's provided or one's received.
Right, because it's an exchange relationship rather than we're working together, looking at the same goal together.
Right.
So if the goal is to have a good relationship, and part of that means cleaning the house, then both people have to be involved in cleaning the house. Now, that doesn't mean have to be 50-50. It might not be 50-50, but both people have to have an investment in doing that.
Right. And we see that how this actually is transferred generationally as well. I mean, traditionally, when a group of women and group of men, couples come together, sometimes we see a division. Like women go to one side and talk about womanly stuff, men go to one side and talk about manly stuff. And the expectation is that for women to bring food to the table and for women to take it out and to clean up.
Correct.
Even though, in modern lifestyle, we see less of that happening, thankfully, but still, there is a level of expectation that the child is raised by mom only, and the dad needs to provide.
Right.
So there are something by nature that, cannot be divided. I get that. Like, a dad cannot breastfeed, a child, right? But the dad certainly can feed the child, using a bottle, right? So there are, in some ways, there are substitutes happening, which is good news. However, for us to get out of codependency, I believe, from what I see in society, from what I see in couples, from what I see in therapy, we have a long way to go.
Well, we have a long way to go in every area. We have just recently, within the last 100 years, allowed the women the right to vote.
1920.
Yeah, well, within the last 102 years.
Yes.
We're 2022. But yeah, giving the women the right to vote, for 150 years, women didn't have the right to vote in our country. Let alone the prejudice that we have, how we at the beginning, said that in the Constitution that blacks are 3/5 of a person. I remember reading that, and I was like, "Wow, that's pretty weird." But yeah, but the main thing is that we need to understand that all of this takes time, but if we're moving in a similar direction where we want equality and we want better relationships, we have to be aware of how we're stopping ourselves and what's actually transpiring to keep us stuck in the old belief systems.
So that's a good topic for next time.
That's a good topic for next time.
Yes, and then I want to say thank you for sharing about yourself. This is really courageous of you. Thank you for that. I appreciate that. So, and then until next week, don't forget that all we need is love.
All you need is love, and have a great weekend, and stay safe.
Stay safe.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.